All right, so let's officially call this to order, and I guess we can take the roll of who's on the committee is in attendance.
Pete Peterson,
Present.
Crystal Kennedy,
Here.
Forrest Dunbar,
Here.
and Austin Quinn Davidson and Jamie Allard are neither in this meeting.
Yeah, I had an email from Austin and she said she couldn't make it today. So, all right, well, let's go with the first item on our agenda and get an update from Ms. Jones about the agreement to help Juneau with their election. Ms. Jones? Okay, did I miss this? Skip ahead. Okay. Let's see, how do I? All right, let's move further down the agenda. If I can figure out how to do that. All right, let's go to legislative priorities. Anyone have a legislative priority dealing with elections or ethics that they need to mention to the group? Oh,
This is Dean.
go ahead, Dean.
Well, I think that we have added this to our legislative priority request in the past. Nobody's mentioned it this year, but we had asked, I think, that the state statutes on recall elections be improved or updated. So that might be something to consider.
Update recall elections. Okay.
Yes, we added that. I think the grounds are confusing and maybe the timeline was difficult to manage. I'm going on memory, but we added it, I think, last year or the year before, or we asked for it to be added to the legislative priorities. I don't think it actually made the cut to the final resolution.
All right. That's something we can take a look at in the future. We also discussed earlier about stamp being a thing of value. Whether I don't believe it, as far as I know, the legislature didn't make changes to the value, what they consider the value of a stamp in the most recent session that I'm aware of. Does anyone have other information about that?
This is Dean.
Go ahead, Dean.
I agree with you. I had watched some of the legislation this past session. I didn't see any legislation related to changing that law, but there were a couple other election law related bills. I'm actually going to pull up my bill tracking, but I think both of them didn't make it through passage.
Well, yeah. Ms. Jones suggests we maybe could prepare a resolution to be sent to the legislative committee about the value of a stamp. Is that something that interests the members of the committee?
Sure.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yeah, I thought we were kind of on track with trying to do that, so I guess I don't see why we wouldn't go ahead and pursue that, because we still would like to have a definitive answer on that question when we talk to candidates. So it would make sense to have that clear statewide as well as at the municipal level. So I guess I'm just saying that I think we probably should just go ahead and try to pursue that, just because it's a little bit in the works. You know how things are. They take a few years for anybody to even actually pay attention. So maybe that's just what we need to do, is continue to just put it out there. And at some point when the legislature actually has the ability to do legislative functions, then maybe they'll get to addressing it. So I would say yes. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll get together with Dean, and he and I'll work on that. Maybe we can present that at our next meeting and we can try to introduce it sometime in July. How does that sound?
Yes, that sounds good to me. So I will work with you on that, Pete, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks, Dean. I just happened to think of one other thing. I got an update about the legislative session from Senator Wielechowski via email last week. And I do believe the state has changed the absentee ballot requirement, that you had to have a reason to apply to vote absentee. And now I believe they're allowing anyone who wants to vote absentee to apply for an absentee ballot with no specific reason. And so that, I think, is a good thing. And looking at the current situation that we're in now, there might be a larger number of people that would prefer to vote absentee this year instead of voting in person. Anybody else have any other legislative priorities or that they can think of right now?
Mr. Chair, this is Dean.
Go ahead, Dean.
I don't have one to add, but since we were mentioning legislation, there was also a bill to prohibit voting by facsimile. And that would change so that right now people can fax in their votes, and it would prohibit that, similar to prohibiting voted marked ballot sent by email. Anyways, it didn't make it before the end of the session as well. So I just thought I'd mention that. I'm trying to track the bills that were before the legislature last session. And those are the two, the absentee voting and this one, prohibiting voting by facsimile. Both died.
Okay, thanks for that.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, is that Ms. Jones?
It is. I apologize. We had a wonderful call with one of our vendors in Juneau that ran a little long. Mr. Gates brought up the issue of facsimile voting, and I think we all discussed this in February when we had that proposal before you to change the code. And I think we all agreed, and there's data out there that says electronic voting is not safe. OIT was concerned about not being able to support it. Dean has said the state is prohibiting it. However, I will tell you, our facsimile voting, electronic voting increased this year because of the coronavirus. And I think we need to revisit that and provide, look a little bit harder at electronic voting and provide some other options. I think the concern always was that someone could alter that ballot PDF that was coming back in, and an option might be we can deliver the ballot to you electronically, but you have to return it by mail or in a Dropbox. And I'd like to bring some of those proposals to the Assembly when we look at some code revisions for 2021.
Okay, fantastic. That sounds like a good idea. Yeah, we definitely want to maintain the integrity of our electoral system, and if we can use technology and still do that, then we should attempt to do that. So did you want to give us an update now on the information that you may have most recently gotten from Juneau?
Yes.
Okay.
Just one moment. I have, let's see. So, yes, Mr. Chair, I would be happy to do that. Most importantly, we have visitors from Juneau right now here at the Election Center. So Beth McEwen, the clerk from Juneau, is here in Anchorage. We did a tour and discussed, okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
We discussed some in-depth processes and procedures. Today we are setting up meetings with vendors. We spend an hour on the phone with K&H, the printer who prints our ballots. Juneau is contracting with that printer, and it is really pretty exciting. The printer would ask a question and say, oh, we can do that. And they'd ask another question and say, oh, we can do that. So Juneau's election is October 6th, and it looks like we are going forward full speed ahead.
Well, fantastic.
I would like to also let the committee know that we contacted a number of other jurisdictions, Wasilla, Matsu Borough, Kenai Peninsula Borough, the state of Alaska, and maybe another jurisdiction that I'm just not recalling right off the top of my head. And we haven't heard back from those jurisdictions. It is possible that we will be doing something for other jurisdictions as well. But Juneau is here first, so right now they're our priority.
Okay. Ms. Kennedy has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Jones, how does that actually work in terms of somebody turning their ballot in? Is it all now basically being mailed to Anchorage, or is there some kind of a Dropbox capability that Juneau would pick up and then mail? How's that working?
Through the chair, Ms. Kennedy, that is a really good question. So I will tell you that I have learned that a really good vote by mail, vote at home election system always has other options for voting, like in-person voting and drop boxes, as well as allowing people to return their ballots by mail. So the current plan, as I understand it, is that Juneau will be using the same vendor that we use to mail ballots. when people return their ballots, they're going to go to a P.O. box in Anchorage. And the reason for that is all mail goes to Anchorage and then to Juneau. So they don't want the ballots to go to Anchorage to Juneau and back to Anchorage. So mail ballots will be sent to a P.O. box in Anchorage. There is in-person voting in Juneau for 2 weeks before the election, and Juneau will have drop boxes. So it's going to look very similar to the Anchorage election.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Ms. Jones. And if I might, Mr. Chair, just follow up a little bit that.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. It does kind of put another layer of the ballot going from somebody's hand to the voter count center, because it sounds to me like if they're using drop boxes as well, then the ballots that are in that drop box at some point then actually get mailed to Anchorage. So there's actually, even though you're dropping it in a box, you're also mailing it and relying on the post office. Is that a good assumption? Is that no matter what, everything's going to get mailed in some form through the post office to Anchorage?
Actually, through the chair, Ms. Kennedy, the clerk in Juneau has a slightly different plan. She is planning on delivering all of the early voted ballots and the Dropbox ballots from Juneau to Anchorage on her person. So she will be coming to Anchorage the day after their election with all of the ballots. And she is working that out with her assembly and the airline and TSA, actually. And she practiced this week when she came up. She brought up some confidential voter information and tested that process, and it worked quite well for her.
Well, interesting. I guess part of the dynamics of being the state that we are. So anyway, I guess I look at all of this, and we can talk about it a little bit more under the budget priorities. But, I look at all of this from a voter's perspective in terms of the accountability and the just the sense of trust that a voter has to have in any kind of a mail-in ballot scenario. So anyway, we can talk a little bit more about how to try to make sure that that not only their voters, but even our voters, can have that sense of surety that their ballot goes from their hands to the count center without a whole lot of other sidetracks along the way. But anyway, thank you.
Well, thank you. And I would think that, if the envelope is sealed, there's no way for someone to change that vote, or it would be really very, very difficult to change it. You'd have to reprint the ballot with the ID on it, and I mean it would take an awful lot of work to do that. It would seem to me, anyway.
Well, Mr. Chair, I wasn't necessarily thinking about that aspect of it. I'm thinking more about the idea that the ballot gets where it needs to be going. And like I said, we can talk a little bit more about that, and just from the perspective of what people's concerns are when we talk about budget priorities. So thanks.
Yes, I think that's a chain of custody issue. And that is the chain of custody. The way that typically works is that there's always two election workers who have taken the election worker oath that are always in possession of the ballots, going from hand to hand to hand. So as an example, when the Juneau clerk, Beth McEwen, brought up the documents to us, what we did was we together, there was 3 of us, and we placed them in one of our secure cages, And that's where Juneau's records will be. So again, they're not in a location where they're accessible by any single person. It's always going to be two people accessing them. So that's a good question about, the chain of custody, Miss Kennedy.
And so if they wanted to be extra secure, they could actually send two people up from Juneau on the flight, I suppose.
They will, Mr. Chair.
Oh, great. Yeah. So already thought about that then.
Well, can I ask another question on that, Mr. Chair?
Certainly, Miss Kennedy.
Thank you. So, Ms. Jones, if somebody is turning their ballot in Juneau, say they're putting it in a drop box, so at some point the Juneau folks pick those up and put them all together in a safe case of some sort, and they get on a plane and they come to Anchorage with them. At what point is there any kind of a tracking or tracing that somebody turned their ballot in? Would any of that happen in Juneau, that somebody actually, that Juneau actually received the ballot, or would all of that wait until they got to Anchorage?
Through the chair, Ms. Kennedy, there are two answers to that question. And the first answer is ballot tracking is possible because both the MOA and Juneau will be using IMB, which is an intelligent mail barcode. So that is the answer, part one answer to your question. The part two answer, though, is that even Anchorage hasn't implemented the status or text alerts or email alerts to voters about what the status of your ballot is. Like, it's been received at this location. The mail USPS has it at this location. The election center has it at this location. Your signature has been verified. So we aren't there yet, but that technology is possible, and we have the data on the envelopes to be able to implement it. We just haven't done it yet.
Ooh, thank you. And that's actually where I want to go in the budget priorities conversation. So I appreciate you kind of leading us into that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Any other questions or comments about legislative priorities? Or the agreement or contract with Juneau? That's a question I have. Have we actually signed an official contract with Juneau about this, counting their ballots?
No, Mr. Chair, we haven't. We are in the process of doing that. As some of you know, this is happening pretty darn quickly, and I believe it started last week when Juneau's assembly approved this on Tuesday night and Wednesday night, and the Juneau clerk is here as of yesterday, and so we have yet to finish that memorandum of understanding, but that's a good point, and it is on our list of things to do.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, can I ask another question?
Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you. Ms. Jones, so what is their real motivation for doing this? Because it certainly seems to me that this would be more expensive. I mean, flying your ballots to Anchorage seems to be a little more costly than just doing some of this on their own. But anyway, well, are they going to save money?
Through the chair, Ms. Kennedy, I do not know the exact answer to that. It is my understanding that the clerk has made a proposal to the Juneau Assembly, and it had a budget component to it. And I do believe that, because that the cost for by mail was more expensive than non-mail, but I think that the coronavirus played a part in it, obtaining election workers played a part in it. And in the long term, I think Juneau had, they have an issue about purchasing new election equipment. And so the cost was wrapped up in that purchase of new election equipment. They were going to purchase their own rather than using the state's. So because of that, I don't know the exact numbers, but I think that Juneau did address those issues.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Dunbar mentions that it increases turnout. And so if you figure out what your cost per vote is, it might, if you have increased turnout, it might actually cost less per vote when it's all said and done. That's a possibility. Okay. Anything else on the MOU that we're working on with Juneau? Or anything else on legislative priorities? Seeing none, I guess we'll slip down to 2021 election budget priorities. And I would think that one thing that we'll have to take into account before we come up with our budget for next year's election would be decide whether we are going to include postage on the return ballots, because obviously that would make a big difference in how much the election would end up costing us. Does anyone have any comments about that?
I do, Mr. Chair. I have a question.
Okay, Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you. If we did put postage on there, it works in such a way that the post office kind of keeps tabs on how much postage they're actually using. Is that correct? I mean, we can work this so that we don't just stick a bunch of stamps and waste stamps on any kind of ballot, right? We would just end up getting charged what we actually spent from people that returned their ballots in the post office.
Ms. Jones, do you have an answer for that?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Ms. Kennedy, the way business reply mail works is, you are correct, is that instead of putting postage or part of the postage on the 214,000 ballot packages that we mailed, the post office keeps track, and we would only be charged for the 71,000 that were returned. However, the biggest problem with prepaid postage and the jurisdictions that do prepay postage, they require the envelopes to be received by Election Day at 8:00 p.m. So for Anchorage, that would probably be about 20,000 envelopes that we would not be counting, because those are not postmarked by Election Day. Those are received by Election Day at 8 p.m. One of the other reasons we would probably not want to make that move is because the state does not do received by Election Day at 8 p.m. and we're trying to mirror the state as much as possible. If the state would make that change, it would make sense for Anchorage to make that change. If not, it really confuses voters to have different rules for the state and for the municipality. I think one of the other issues that's pretty important is, I think everyone on this group understands that because the envelopes have official election mail on them, even if someone doesn't have sufficient postage or has no postage, those ballot return envelopes will be delivered to us, postage due, and we will pay that.
Mr. Dunbar, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Ms. Jones, I don't quite understand why it works that way. How would the post office even know what date our election was? And, you know, could we tell them we'll pay for anything that comes in until some other date? And then alternatively, you know, what is the mechanism by which we pay after people put it in the mail without postage? And is that a potential solution where we just say, like, we just print on the envelope, drop this in the mail, you know, that you don't need to put postage on this, and then we'll just pay. You know, because I agree with Ms. Kennedy. I mean, ideally, and it's been a budget issue in the past, but you know, I do think that there's some equity concerns, and I'm willing to pay for anything that people drop. So yeah, so those are my two questions. Why does the post office do it that way, and is there any way to push that time limit out? And then alternatively, why don't we just put on the envelope, you know, drop this in the mail, and we'll pick up the tab?
Through the chair, Mr. Dunbar, you are correct that we could say, drop this in the mail and we'll pick up the tab. I'm not sure that there's anything prohibiting us from doing that. I think we would probably need to check with the post office and make sure. So that is one easy answer. The second answer is more complicated. Here is what could happen. If our current requirement says that you have to have your ballot postmarked by election day, and currently the post office is open, let's say, until 11 o'clock p.m. on election day, and you walk in and drop your ballot off at 11 o'clock p.m., it's been mailed on election day. And in our current world, you could get it hand canceled. We pick up that mail the next morning, and we go through the mail, and we keep the mail that's postmarked on election day, and we set aside the mail that is not postmarked on election day. If we changed it to the prepaid postage, we could go to the Anchorage post office and we could pick up all of the mail that is there at 8 o'clock the day after the election. And we would be picking up mail that had been mailed on election day until 11 or 12 o'clock p.m. But we would also be picking up mail that had been mailed from 1 o'clock in the morning until 7:30 or 8 that morning. So we would be counting ballots of people who voted after election day.
So that's the key point. I think there's a key fact I think got left out, which, if I'm remembering right, they don't postmark business reply mail. Is that right?
Correct. That is absolutely correct.
That's the key fact. They don't
Correct.
postmark business reply mail.
Correct.
Okay.
And then we accept envelopes from people out of state, overseas, who mail their envelopes from other locations as long as they get here by 10 days after the election for the public session of canvass. So none of those ballots would count because they would not have a postmark and they wouldn't have been received. And the reason you don't want to accept those is because then people could be voting after election day. So it's a trade-off, and it's up to the assembly, but that's the trade-off.
Got it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Could I get a motion to extend the meeting by 10 minutes?
Move to
Move
extend.
to extend the meeting. Okay, second.
Okay, thank you. Let's proceed. Crystal, Ms. Kennedy, did you have another question?
Well, yeah, it's still kind of in this whole budget idea, but, you know, Ms. Jones, you kind of brought it up a little bit about talking about how we could have some kind of feedback loop for people that have turned in their ballot. Now, I know that daily there's a running list that you can go check on if you're a voter, if you want to check and make sure that your ballot got in. But one of the things that I would like us to be able to do I think for credibility purposes, is make that feedback automatic so that when their ballot gets processed and you say you have it there at the election center, that somebody gets an email or they get a text or some way gets notified, hey, we got your ballot. I think that's one of the key things that people are afraid that, well, I stuck my ballot in the mailbox. I don't know if it ever got there. And of course, there are ways for them to check. But just in terms of kind of ramping up this idea of having real integrity in the election and having the credibility of where these ballots are going, I think it would be nice to have some kind of feedback to the voter themselves. So you mentioned a little bit about that. Can you expand a little bit more on what we could possibly do in Anchorage?
Through the chair, yes, Ms. Kennedy. What we're looking at right now is a system of text or email alerts, and I think in many jurisdictions it's called Track My Ballot. And the jurisdictions track ballots by use of the IMB, which I mentioned is the Intelligent Mail Barcode. We currently have the Intelligent Mail Barcode both on the outer envelope and on the return envelope. So using that data, we would be able to tell voters, or voters would be automatically notified, your ballot has been mailed, your ballot is in your P.O. box, your ballot is with the carrier, your ballot, your return ballot is was picked up from the drop box, your signature has been verified, your ballot has been processed. So yes, that is possible. Right now, we are in the process. We have discussed talking with a couple of other groups. Denver, Colorado uses the Track My Ballot. I believe some of the jurisdictions in Washington and Oregon that we've used Track My Ballot. And we're going to set up some conversations with them to find out what that entails. And then we could come back to you at your next meeting and give you an estimate of what that would cost for us to implement that in 2021.
Okay, perfect. I think, yeah, let's do that. I think there are a lot of reasons why we would want to, for just the integrity of the election purposes. And so anyway, I'm happy to do whatever it takes to try to help people understand both that their ballot is safe, is being handled properly, and that this would also help us track those ballots that if somebody did get a ballot that shouldn't have and voted it, and if we haven't caught it yet for a signature purpose, we could basically be notifying people that, hey, somebody voted your ballot, and if it wasn't you, you better let us know. So anyway, I think there's just a lot of good reasons to do that. So I'm really interested in seeing what it might cost us. So thank you very much for working on this already.
You're welcome.
So, Ms. Jones, if could we set up a website or a list on the Muni website that, say, had an alphabetical list of people whose ballots had been received or counted, so that they could be assured that their vote had gotten through?
Mr. Chair, I'm not exactly sure how the Track Your Ballot system works, but I can report back to you about that next year. It probably won't be public information like on the website. It would probably be, because it's personal information. As Ms. Kennedy said, some of the information certainly is public, like who voted. That is certainly public. But the part of Track Your Ballot is it's a system that just notifies you about your ballot by a text message or an email. And hopefully at the next meeting, I can give you more information about how that exactly works and how people sign up for it. That could be on our website. I don't know.
Okay. All right, thanks. Anything else about election budget priorities or legislative priorities for elections? All right, we got just a couple minutes. Anything about the regular municipal election wrap up that we want to discuss? I just wanted to note that there were 413 ballots that were postmarked after election day that were obviously not counted, just for informational purposes for the members of the committee.
Mr. Chair, Erica McConnell, our new Deputy Clerk of Elections, is on the line, and I asked her if she would give you a brief 2020 election wrap-up. Would that be okay?
Certainly. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to just mention 4 items. One is that the committee is aware that an automatic recount was triggered for Proposition 1. As you know, the recount was successfully performed with 2 additional votes being counted, and the Assembly has recertified the election. Number 2, the elections team is coordinating with the state of Alaska to provide voter history to them, as well as information collected during the election about voters who have either moved out of state or died. And due to the preparations at the state for the fall statewide elections, the Division of Elections is not taking our information regarding undeliverable ballots this year. But they are doing a large update based on PFD information. So hopefully a great deal of that information will be captured on their end. Number 3, we have mailed letters to voters whose ballots were rejected in accordance with Municipal Code 28.85.010D. And lastly, we will be shredding the documents such as ballots, ballot return envelopes in accordance with our retention schedule on June 5th, which is a week from Friday. Be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. McConnell. Any questions from members of the committee?
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Go ahead, Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you. Just on those rejected ballots, Erica, how many were there?
Through the chair, Ms. Kennedy, I'd have to check the Election Commission's report, but I believe there was something between 900 and 1,000. As Mr. Chair mentioned, there were 400 and a little bit. The ones whose postmarked were after Election Day. I would note that those were just the ballots that were received by the public session of Canvass. Since then, we have received more ballots that are also postmarked too late. So we sent out over 900 letters, and I can get you the exact number if you like.
It's 977, actually.
Thank you.
Thank you. And can you just kind of give an overview of what the reasons were? I mean, there probably was a range, but was there anything that really jumped out that people were having a problem with their ballot and therefore they made this mistake, and then maybe that's something we can correct next time? Was there anything like that that kind of jumped out at you?
Through the chair, Ms. Kennedy, the majority of those that weren't postmark related were either people who had not signed their return ballot envelope or people whose signature didn't match the signature on file with the state. All of those individuals had been sent cure letters, so they had an opportunity to cure that issue. But we have some thoughts about education that we can do before the next election to remind people about signing and about the signature matching issue.
Yep, there were actually 87 people who failed to sign their envelope and 348 that had no signature match on the return ballot envelope. So that plus the ones that came in later, the vast majority of the ones that were not counted.
Thank you. Yeah, I remember seeing that report, but I agree. The education piece is probably always going to be a challenge. But anyway, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think we're about running out of time. Is there anyone that would like, in the audience, who would like to do participation? I don't see anyone, so I guess we'll be, do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
Move to adjourn.
Okay, thank you. We are adjourned, and I think we've got another work session starting here in about 15 minutes.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, thank you all.
Bye, thank you.